Hello students, in this video we will take a look at a brief analysis of CAT 24 in the third slot, that is the evening slot. This video will be useful for all the students who took CAT 24 and want to analyze their performance, whether you took the CAT in slot 1 or slot 2 or slot 3. You want to look at the comparison across the different slots of the question paper, how to evaluate your number of attempts. Please do watch this video. This video may also be useful for the students who are planning to take the CAT next year, just to get an understanding of the exam pattern and difficulty level. So what we'll do in this video is we'll go section by section. There were 3 sections in the paper. So we'll look at VARC, DILR and Quant. We'll look at the overall analysis of the slot 3 paper and then also compare the slot 3 with the previous 2 slots of CAT 24 to give you an idea that whichever slot you took the paper in, how your number of attempts and number of marks can translate into what expected percentile. Let's start with section 1. Overall, there were not too many difficulties faced by the students. It was pretty smooth. And in slot 3, most of the students might have read of the analysis of slot 1 and slot 2. So they were sort of forewarned that the major twist that happened in the VARC section was that unlike the previous few years, the RC section was not distinct and separate from the VA section. The questions were all mixed up. The distribution of questions, number of questions remained same. There were 4 RC passages, each with 4 questions, as had happened in the previous CAT papers also, and there were 8 verbal ability questions. But the twist was that they were all mixed up, and many of the students might have expected that the first question would be based on the first RC passage. Instead, they were confronted with a VA question. But like I said, many of the students might have been forewarned by the experiences that were shared by students writing the test in slot 1 and slot 2 and might have been prepared for this. Basically, since the number of questions remained the same, a very quick scan across the section would have told the students that we are going to have 4 passages and VA questions. And once you were able to identify that the distribution of questions is same, you could have just proceeded with whatever similar strategy as what you had planned. If you had planned to write or attempt 2 RC passages, you could have continued doing so and then moved on to VA. Whatever was your strategy, it need not have changed much. You just would have spent a few additional seconds or perhaps a minute to just scan through all the questions. There were no non-MCQ type questions in the RC. They were all MCQs, 4 questions for each passage. In verbal ability section, there were questions that came from 3 basic categories. One was sentence placement. This type of question had been introduced last year also. One was para summary questions and one was odd one out. So we did not have any para jumble kind of questions in this year's CAT in slot 3, but there was no new variety of questions that was introduced. It was all on expected lines. There were 4 RC passages. The first one was based on the theme of contamination of earthly bacteria on any space projects in Mars. It was readable to a certain extent, but there was a slightly higher level of difficulty in the readability because of some usage of some technical words. Then the next passage was actually a book excerpt. It was based on the impact of artificial intelligence, and I'm sure that the students who have been regularly reading the newspapers must have come across a variety of articles based on artificial intelligence. Many of the students perhaps are using AI applications on their own. So the familiarity level must have been good for those students. This was an excerpt from a book that was released this year, 2024, a book called Nexus by Yuval Noah Harari. So it's always, of course, a good idea, as we suggest to all the students, to keep reading. You never know that something that you have read may actually appear in CAT. It's happened once or twice with me personally. Then there was another passage. This was also easy language, This was based on extinction of languages, and the focus of this passage was essentially North America. But still, there was not it was not heavy or dense language or very heavy vocabulary. There were, of course, some words used, such as Navajo tribe in America. Students just had to understand that Inuit and Navajo are names of tribes and languages. And the last passage was based on a particular brand or particular variety of Chinese liquor. It was a business based passage. So overall, all the four passages were not of any themes which was so esoteric that the students would simply not comprehend. One big bugbear or fear of students is, let there not be some heavy philosophy based passages. So none of these passages was in that sense philosophy based. They were all kind of contemporary business or technology based, and the extinction of languages is sociology based passages. So not that difficult to read. None of them was very long either. However, the questions were extremely tricky because almost all of the passages had inference based questions. The question language had to be understood or probably read twice or thrice to understand that there is a single negative, double negative, or even triple negative in the question. As far as the verbal ability section is concerned, they were also on expected lines, easy to moderate. The para summary based questions had some close options. Essentially, the challenge, as was expected, was in the closeness of the options, which means that the student had to read every single word of the option perhaps more than once, and to quickly compare and weigh that which is the more suitable word which makes the correct answer. So overall, our analysis is that the VARC section this time was moderate, and as per the feedback that we had got for slot 1 and slot 2, VARC seems to be a tad easier than slot 1 and slot 2, and perhaps a tad easier than the previous year's CAT. So our analysis is that a student who can attempt 3 passages, that is about 12 questions, and 7 out of the VA questions, so around 19 questions, would be an exceedingly good number of attempts. And that is something that we have been advising during our aimcats also, that a really good attempt would be somebody who can try 3 passages in about 28 to 30 minutes and then leave about 10 minutes for the VA questions. So over here, definitely there would be some time that would be needed to just hunt through the VA questions, but not a significant time. The important thing, students, is that since there was no drastic change in the pattern, they had just jumbled up the sequence of the questions. So to keep a cool head, to understand that there can be some changes in the pattern and not deviate too much from the strategy, not panic too much, not have a mental freeze and just keep looking at the questions. More or less your strategy could have been the same. There were some questions definitely that were tricky, that were inference based, but there were many questions that had answer choices that were not very close, particularly the sentence placement ones and the odd one out. One more thing in VARC, sometimes the students did not read the question instruction very properly, and they misunderstood the odd one out question as a parajumble question, and they entered in, because this was not a multiple choice question, they entered in the entire sequence of the 5 sentences in the answer box rather than just typing in the odd one out. So in general, for all students who are writing future such exams, please do read the instructions very carefully. Similarly, even in the sentence placement questions, there were 4 options, but the fourth blank, that is which was marked as 4, could have been option 1, and the third blank, which was marked as with a bracketed 3, could have been option 2. So one had to be a little careful and not make silly mistakes like saying that if it's the fourth blank, then I must mark fourth option. If you just avoided these silly mistakes, then it was not very difficult. So our estimate first cut analysis is that for an 85 percentile, which is what we roughly say is clearing the cutoff, means about 10 attempts with good accuracy, so about 8 right, 8 to 9 right, that kind of accuracy, 80% kind of an accuracy, to get about 24 marks would earn you 85 percentile. 14 attempts with about 11 or 12 right can get you 95 percentile, and to get the topmost 99 percentile would be about 16 attempts with about 12-13 right. So that is our analysis. So it is definitely, this year looks like a scoring section for students. But yes, like always, this is a section that demanded from the students a lot of prior reading practice and practice of the various VA questions also. So our study material and tests would have been sufficient preparation with all the variations and patterns that we have provided, sufficient preparation to be able to attempt this section. Let's go on to DILR. This time the twist in DILR was, number one, most of the caselets were DI based. If you just look at this table, even the logical reasoning based caselets had a lot of quant in it. So it was very calculation intensive, very quant heavy, unlike in the previous papers. And the second twist was that unlike the previous year's CAT, where there were only 4 caselets with 5 questions each, this time there were 5 caselets, 3 with 4 questions each and 2 with 5 questions each. So that we had now this time 22 questions instead of 20 questions. But once again, in terms of the DILR strategy, one should have just played to one's strengths and identified those caselets which were looked doable or doable in limited time and gone ahead with it. It so happened that the 5 question ones were a little more difficult because they had a lot of calculations, and the 4 questions one were relatively easier. All of them were on familiar and expected lines. There was no major new concept that needed to be used. Content in food grains caselet was completely calculation based. So was the bar graph. We have taken bar graph as a very important topic in our study material in our classes. Then the ATM network was based on the roots and networks concepts that we teach. The GDP population was completely calculation based, and so was the line graph. So very expected graphs and table interpretation had to be done. So there was a good proportion of doable test sets. In fact, for some students the dilemma could have been that how many to do, because they all looked doable. So unlike in previous CATs, or sometimes the students feel that in any case I will not even know how to start with any caselet. All these caselets looked like familiar for students who have practiced sufficiently, and they were doable. But what you had to make sure is that you select the set that can be doable in limited time, so that you don't run out of time. But overall, definitely easier than last year's DILR, so the cutoffs are expected to go higher this year. It was definitely, as expected, a little more difficult than the VARC section. Our cutoff analysis for the DILR section is that about 9 attempts, so attempting around 2 caselets or so, and this DILR should have a very good accuracy, especially the multiple choice questions were not very difficult. So about 9 questions with around 7 odd correct should land you with 85 percentile, clearing the cutoff, so to say. 95 percentile will be about 11 attempts, that is trying to attempt 2 to 2.5, and 15 attempts would land you in the 99 percentile range. Coming to the last section, that is quant. It was on expected lines in terms of the number of questions. There was no surprise there. There were about 22 questions, 9 of them being type in the answer kind. Now in this particular CAT, we had questions coming from almost all of the main topics. Broadly 13 out of arithmetic. As compared to last year's CAT, there were far many more arithmetic questions. 4 from algebra, 3 from geometry, and 2 from modern maths, that is from permutations and combinations. More finer breakdown of topic wise. You can see there were plenty of questions of indices, logarithms, and surds this time. Logarithms is a topic that some students feel does not come very frequently in the CAT exam, but we had questions on logarithm as well as surge as well as indices, some fairly doable questions on geometry. Then we also had questions that involved the usage of median, that is a statistics concept was there. Uh, after many, I think after many years, we had a proper set theory kind of a question also. Numbers, which had not featured uh, very prominently in the previous CAT, we had questions on numbers also, functions. So you can see the distribution of questions was over a large number of topics, which obviously highlights the importance of not neglecting any topic of a proper preparation. This time I realized, and this is also the feedback from the students who took the CAT, that there were many questions that were direct, almost direct applications of some of the concepts that we teach in our classes or that are included in our study material. There were some direct formula based questions also. So a thorough practice of our study material, mock tests and attending the classes should have put you in a very good position to attempt the quant section. So as we saw in this table, certainly there was far many more questions on arithmetic than algebra this time. So higher emphasis on arithmetic. Some of the questions of arithmetic were time consuming, but none of the questions was drastically difficult, and for many of the questions you could have obtained the answer by just eliminating options or by just looking at the options and trying to see which option can fit into the given conditions. So you did not have to solve the equations. It was pretty easy and short to eliminate options in many of the questions. We didn't have questions based on graphs, Venn diagrams, number systems, trigonometry, probability and inequalities. Typically we get very few questions over the last few years in CAT for these questions. So that was again on expected lines. We had actually this time another topic that sometimes students neglect is simple and compound interest. So there were two questions based on simple and compound interest also this year. But overall feedback is, as compared to last year, as we saw in DILR, even quant seems to be decidedly easier than last year. So this is our estimate of the cutoff for the quant section. 8 attempts with about 6 right should get you to 85 percentile. About 11 attempts with about 8 to 9 right, 8 right or so, should 8 to 9 right, yeah, should get you about 95 percentile, and 16 attempts with about 11 to 12 right should get you to 99 percentile, 12 to 13 right actually. But it is very much possible for a student who has practiced well to hit the 14-15 mark attempts also in the quant section. So overall analysis of the slot 3. It looks definitely much easier, at least in the two sections of DILR and quant. In VARC it is a little subjective. It is overall, it does not look to be more difficult than last year, perhaps similar difficulty level. So the recommended number of attempts or an R analysis should have been slightly higher than last year. Students should have targeted more number of questions. Now finally a comparative analysis of the 3 slots of CAT 24. Before that, this is for the overall analysis of the slot 3 for overall all the 3 sections put together. Clearing cutoff for the good B schools to get about 90 percentile means about 60 to 63 marks overall, adding all the 3 sections together. And 99 percentile would mean about 97 to 99 marks. A comparative analysis. Overall, it seems that the final slot of CAT 24 was somewhat easier in all the 3 sections as compared to the other 2 slots. Moreover, many of the students were a little forewarned about the change in pattern. So this is our comparative analysis. As you can see that according to time, the afternoon slot for VARC seems to have been relatively tough. So we are recommending a cutoff of 20 for getting 85 percentile and the evening slot of 23. In the DILR section, the morning and afternoon slot seems to have similar difficulty level, but the evening slot seems to be easier, so higher cutoff. And even in the quant section, afternoon slot seems to be the most difficult and evening slot the easiest. So these are our estimates, first cut analysis. As and when we get more and more feedback from the students, we will be able to refine these values. But overall, the takeaway from CAT 24 is that it just required very regular and consistent practice across all the areas, and it required a cool head not to get panicky by small changes in the pattern. Thanks a lot. All the very best.